Welcome to this Nexa video, where we will give you examples on how to build master and derived forms. We will also give you a brief explanation about the connection between forms, classes, and database tables. This video is mainly aimed at the Nexa administrators, who have the permissions to create and modify classes and forms. In Nexa, all the objects representing your company's data are called items, and each of them is an instance of a class. From the point of view of the Nexa backend, an instance of a class is a row in a database table. There are 5 basic kinds of classes. From them, it is possible to create an unlimited number of custom classes suiting the needs of your company. A class can be seen as a blueprint or a template that provides a complete description of the items it represents. Usually companies need many classes in order to represent their data. Some of these classes are often similar to each other. We can say that 2 classes are similar if they share any attributes. This implies that it can be more efficient to build a single table containing all the attributes of similar classes and then create filters that are specific for each of them. In Nexa, the database tables are managed with forms. This video is aimed at explaining how to create forms and the associated database tables and filter the attributes for different classes, define the front-end interface that allows the users to interact with the objects of the database. There are 2 kinds of forms, the master forms and the derived forms. When one saves a new master form, this immediately triggers the creation of a new table in the database. Each field of the form corresponds to a column of the table. There is a one-to-one relation between master forms and the tables of the database. In the following, we will use 2 similar terms, fields and attributes. A form is a collection of fields that allow the end user to view or modify the values of the attributes of the items in Nexa. While you can always add new attributes to a database table, by adding them to the master form, the opposite is not allowed. You cannot remove columns from a table or equivalently remove attributes from a master form. This is to preserve the relational integrity of the database. The derived forms instead define the filters that select a subset of the fields of the master form for a specific class. In other words, if a class does not need a particular field present in the master form, we can suppress it in the derived form. This action does not change the database table. It only defines the columns of the table that are accessible to a given class. For completeness, one should take into account that there exists a subset of the common attributes, the so-called required attributes, that cannot be suppressed in the derived forms. The second important role of the derived forms is to be the interfaces that allow the users to manipulate class instances. A well-designed interface allows a user to keep under control all the attributes of a class. A single master form parent can have many derived forms as children. For a complete explanation of all the functionalities of the form editor, please refer to the dedicated video that we released on the subject. To create our first master form, I log into Nexa as an admin, I select Administration, Forms, I right-click on it and select Add. At this point, a window for the creation of a new form pops up. I select Master Form. I need to decide the name of the form and of the associated database table. Keeping these 2 names similar is a good practice since the master forms are the visual interfaces for the database tables. There is more freedom regarding the name of the form since it is just the name of an interface for the users, while the database table has to follow the typical restrictions of the SQL language. For example, it cannot be formed of separated words. A list of the limitations regarding the database table names can be found in the complete guide to the Nexa backend. In this case, I named the form firstMaster, while the database table is going to be first_master. Underneath the name entries, one can see the box Include Common Attributes. If you flag it, the newly created master form will contain also the fields for the so-called common attributes, sometimes referred to as system attributes. In this case, I flag it and click Save. You can see that the form has appeared in the form hierarchy. Like all the master forms, it has an icon containing the M letter. On the right-hand side, when the Layout tab is selected, one can see all the fields and how they will be shown to the users. We can see that some of the attributes are black, while others are blue. The blue ones are the so-called required attributes. Since we flagged the Include Common Attributes box, our form contains only the fields for this kind of attributes at the beginning. If we hadn't checked that box, the new form would have been empty. No field would have been present. I can change the appearance of all the fields in the form layout by dragging their position around, expanding the reserved space, etc. If I double-click on a field, the Edit Field Properties window appears and I can use it to further customize its appearance. Each attribute is associated to a column of the database table, where name corresponds to the name of the database column. I can change these names by modifying the entry name. On the other hand, the name of the attribute that the end users will visualize is determined by a variable called prompt. Forms always have this kind of duality, since they link the backend and the front end, and the latter is more customizable than the former. Each attribute has also a type and a stored length that define the memory space allocated by the system. For example, the attribute comment has type attribute textbox, and it can store up to 3999 characters. I'm now going to add new custom attributes to the table. In order to do so, I click on the first button at the top of the layout pane. At this point, there appears a list of drag and drop attributes. For example, I mouse over on the text attribute, click on it, and drag it into the layout. At this stage of the creation of a field, Nexa provides automatic parameters like the prompt, the name, etc. It is possible to customize these quantities before I save the form. On the other hand, the type has been defined at the time when I clicked on the button of the toolbox and it cannot be changed. This is exactly the meaning of this gray font. If I can modify one of the parameters, its font is going to be black. I decide that the name of this attribute in the database table is going to be text1_back, while in the front end it will be displayed as text1front. There is also a different method to add fields. I can in fact right-click directly in the layout and select the desired attribute type. The corresponding field will appear at the mouse pointer position. Please remember that you can delete the fields only before saving the master form. For example, right-click and delete the float attribute. Once the table has been built, no attribute can be deleted. At this point, I decide that the master form has enough fields for my needs. I click on Save, and the system adds the new attribute to the table in the database. The master form has been saved. However, my aim is to build a new custom class, and for this reason I need derived forms. Derived forms get their name from the fact that they depend on a master form. I go to the form hierarchy, I navigate to the newly created first master, I right-click on it and select Add. The same kind of window we used to create the master form pops up. This time I select Derived Form. Notice that I can define a name for the derived form. In this case we'll call it First Derived, but I cannot change the name of the database table or unflag the Add Common Attributes box. This is due to the fact that the derived form has the role of a filter for an existing database table that is defined through the master form only. When I click on Save, the new derived form appears in the form hierarchy. We remind you that derived forms are filters for the attributes of a database table. For this reason, when I decide to suppress attributes or to add them back, I'm not adding or removing columns to the database table. I'm just defining whether they are going to be editable or not for a specific class. For this reason, a derived form cannot have more attributes than its master form. It can only select a subset of them. At the beginning, the derived form has access to all the attributes of its master form. If I decide that the derived form does not need one of them, I right-click on it and select Suppress. As you can see, this attribute has disappeared from the form layout. We will see in a minute that the derived forms have a direct correspondence to the interface used in the front end. For this reason, when an attribute is suppressed from a derived form, it also disappears from the front-end interface. When I click on the Fields tab, I can see that the fields that I suppressed are no longer visible. If I check the Show Suppressed Fields box, they become visible, but their fonts are gray. In order to get the suppressed attributes back to the layout, I just need to right-click on one of them and select Unsuppress. When I am ready to save the current derived form structure, I click on Save. What happens to an existing derived form if I add a custom attribute to its master form. I add a second integer attribute to the master form and click on Save. The derived form does not change. However, the new attribute is now present among the suppressed attributes, and I can add it to the derived form by right-clicking on it and selecting Unsuppress. If I want to preserve the changes, I click on Save. At this point, we have created a master form and a derived form. We remind you that it is possible to create as many derived forms as you need from a single master form. It is now time to use this derived form to build a new class. I select Administration, Classes, I right-click on it and select Add. A dialog opens where I can enter the required parameters for the class. At the beginning, I decide the class name, First Class. Each class needs an existing parent class. In Nexa there are 5 basic kinds of classes: change items, companies, files, parts, and projects. I click on Files and then OK. I can now select a derived form to be associated with the class. The list of possible choices includes the recently created first derived form. I select it, and I use the Product Center revision sequence. When I click on Save, the class becomes available for the users. We can now add new items to the database belonging to the brand new first class. At first, I select the Desktop tab. I click on New in order to insert a new item in Nexa. Our new class is a child of the File class, so I select File. As you can see, this form is not the one we just created. It is the one associated to the Files class. I click on the Change Class button at the top right of this window. I expand the File class hierarchy and select the first class. Now I can see that the form has changed and it has the new fields that I previously defined. I enter the required attributes values, the blue ones. I select the file to be attached and I click on OK. At this point, the new object belonging to the first class has been injected into Nexa. Summing up, in this video we have shown you how to build master and derived forms. Master forms are used to create the tables of the database and they give rise to derived forms. Derived forms, in turn, filter the attributes of the tables that are needed to the classes. They also define the interfaces between classes and end users. A user, in fact, inserts new items in Nexa by selecting a specific class and filling the corresponding derived form. You can now add and modify forms to better suit the needs of your company. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so that you don't miss all the upcoming Nexa videos with new tutorials and feature updates. Thanks for watching.